Let's not judge those of the past by today's standards. Hi, this is Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and I'm going to talk briefly about critical thinking and the power of understanding. It has come out December 10th that John Hopkins, long to believe an abolitionist, actually owned slaves, university says. I want you to think about that. An abolitionist who owns slaves. Now, I'm not going to condemn this individual. If you're in a time period where individuals are being bought and sold as property and you believe this is not good, sometimes you've got to step into the system in order to protect the individuals. I know of a number of cases where individuals would buy entire families of slaves, take them right off the market, and they are technically still slaves, but they were treated well on the plantation in which they were receiving protection. It's like during the Holocaust, where individuals presented a public persona in order to protect Jewish individuals who would otherwise have gone to a concentration camp. It is that doing a poor job on purpose in order to lift up and raise the higher cause. We have to understand that if an individual was an abolitionist, that doesn't mean they couldn't own slaves. In the same way that a large corporation today may not intentionally hire slaves, but through third-party vendors, through poor risk management, through poor compliance, may actually rent slaves. It's the example of the social justice warrior who protests the 1% with an iPhone in their hand. The mental connection is not there that they're using the device of the oppressor or the so-called oppressor in rebellion. Well, John Hopkins, as an abolitionist, purchasing slaves may have been the best and most socially acceptable way to reduce the impacts of slavery. Understand this. This is very important. There are many colleges that own slaves. Washington Lee College in Lexington, Virginia, actually was bequested slaves. So when somebody owned slaves and they died, they gave them to the college. The lore there is that those slaves were actually put to work, but they kept 100% of their earnings less housing. So the college provided them housing, which they paid for, and they provided job opportunities, which they received the pay for. What's the difference between being a slave and being a worker? Now, the individuals could leave at any time, and many chose not to. But we don't know their situation. It's the same as somebody working in a factory and deciding to stay at the factory rather than moving to the next town over and taking up a different occupation. Who are we to judge these individuals outside of their context? So John Hopkins had slaves and was an abolitionist as well. So how can this be? Motivated by Quaker beliefs, freed his slaves in 1807. So his father freed slaves in 1807, and Hopkins was just a boy at the time. And then he continues with these abolitionist beliefs, and it's public knowledge that he's against slavery, yet he owns slaves. We don't know the situation. If you had the choice between you see a slave auction and a harsh master is seeking to buy these slaves, and you have the means to stop that by being the highest bidder in that purchase, have you done bad? Have you done good? And if you would have bought the slave in the 1800s and immediately freed them, what would have happened? See, this is a historical time period where free blacks were kidnapped out of the North and put into slavery in the South, where slaves were escaping and moving north, where there were bounties on individuals because they sought freedom. It's too complex for us to simplify and judge from a historical perspective. And see, this kind of judgment gets modern people looking at past the past and assuming those individuals were primitive. The Mayan cultures had water filtration systems that used quartz and zeolite to sterilize the water and make it drinkable. This is a technology that we feel we've discovered in recent times, yet they were using it 2,185 years ago. If we can be wrong about our ancestors' knowledge, if we can be wrong about the meaning of tradition, then we can be wrong about our judgment on individual choices when it comes to slavery. In my own family, we had family members that would buy slaves and own slaves, but they were buying them to piss off people. They would buy the father and the mother and the child and bring them all together to a community. They would write passes for them so that they could travel freely. Now, they were also a pastor of a church, and they preached regularly the evils of slavery, and even went before Congress to ask that and basically demonstrate that the slave system was not a benefit to white individuals, so that the slave master actually didn't benefit from slavery because of the not only the moral injustices of it, but the economic injustices of it. And throughout life, these situations have happened where the context of delivery was put in the most hearable way, yet the intentions of the action were noble. So in order to know and judge John Hopkins here, we must go in and look at all of the individuals and their experiences. Was he abusive to these slaves? What liberties and freedoms were the slaves able to have as a slave of his plantation versus other plantations? Was there criticism within the family about the ownership position, or was it even considered an ownership position? See, as someone who is studying strategic relationships, there are contextual relationships in the sociology of individuals. Now, what does that mean? That sounds like a lot of BS, but the context is why did they make this decision in the context that they did? What is the public view? What is the private view and beliefs? What is the intention or outcome? See, there are many people on the Underground Railroad that hid slaves, that if someone came to their door and there was a slave hiding in their basement, would lie outright to officials, claim support of things they did not believe in, and do what was necessary to ensure the safe passage of another individual. Looking back on them, their statements in the newspaper would be biased, would be out of context. Watch the movie Schindler's List. A Nazi officer made possible the escape of many individuals who were otherwise in an internment camp or a concentration camp. Sometimes the incompetence and the mistakes that individuals make may not have been mistakes. And we judge based on our own beliefs, sometimes to make ourselves feel better or different or more noble, or to attract attention. As someone who studies strategic relations, you must understand that your feelings have no validity when you research and look at others. Judge not, lest ye be judged, they say in the Bible. And if you judge someone else rather than just gathering the facts and trying to understand their intentions, their beliefs, their position, then you'll be blinded to the persona or the character which they portray. I make a habit of reading books that are unusual and often along the sides. Like Thick Face, Black Heart is a book about mental toughness. I've read Rules for Radicals, and I've read many of the propaganda from organizations as well as the anti-propaganda for those organizations. What I often find is universal threads of motivation, behavior, and deception. And so you can go and study John Hopkins and see the new revelation that he was an abolitionist and a slaveholder, but that doesn't mean anything. You can hold, in fact, it's a sign of intelligence, to hold two conflicting ideas in your mind and debate them. The founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, they owned slaves. And judgment from our perspective is that was evil. Yet they both publicly and privately struggled with the concept of ownership. There are people today who are taking actions and behaviors, claiming sides that in 20 years will be judged as ineffective, counterproductive, useless. There are decisions that our politicians make, and it seems like those who scream the loudest about the sins of another tend to have the sins of their own. But there are politicians today that do things that we won't know about for 20 or 30 years. So where's the application in this? First off, it is difficult to know the context and historical situation of an individual without taking a lot of investment or time and research. There's a note that that John Hopkins and his brothers accepted slaves as collateral for debt. Okay, well, he holds anti-slavery political views in a culture where slaves are considered to have monetary value. Taking slaves as collateral for debt, and you believe that slavery is wrong, if you don't get paid back, the worst thing that happens is you free people. See, again, you have to do the homework. So we talk about working papers. You can collect all the ideas. So if you have trouble keeping two conflicting ideas in your mind, you can collect them in a working paper. And you can say, well, what is this individual's perspective? What would people outside see when they looked at this individual? What is the context of what was normal in that society? Are you aware that there were times in our society where showing skin of any type was considered evil or seductive, and that individual, that woman, was a temptress? Today, you can wear short shorts, nobody cares. It's a different context. So there's also the cultural context. There's the economic context. And when you map out all these situations, you can then make a decision that's more educated. And very often the decision is neutral. And it really doesn't matter what John Hopkins did. It matters what you do. It matters what you believe. It matters what you stand for. I've seen other situations where individuals have bought out companies and laid off everybody in the new company. So they come in and they buy out the company, they consolidate resources, they lay off all these individuals, and then later end up hiring back some of them. But if they would have retained those individuals, the company would not have financially been able to survive, and it would have collapsed in on itself. Now, did they have to buy out the other organization? Well, it made them a stronger organization. It made them more viable in the marketplace. And then 5 or 10 years later, they're still able to hire folks where they believed if they had kept the company the way it was, they would not be able to hire anybody. The company would have failed. Now, you might be saying, well, that company would have failed and some other company would have come along. Well, we don't know that. All we know is the decisions we make today and the control that we have over ourselves. Now, this exercise of understanding historical context is a good practice. You can use it in your own genealogy. You can use it on your own hobby base, or you can also use it when you're setting up deals and opportunities. But the key to understand is that your personal beliefs, your emotional context doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in this situation. Now, you can use it later to shape your judgment, but ultimately collect the facts. Collect the facts from different perspectives. Collect the facts in context of the time period. And reserve your judgment. Because, again, you can judge someone today, but that judgment will come back much harsher on you in the future. It may be better to forgive them for their faults, understand your own faults, and work towards the strengths of the situation. So I'm not surprised to hear that John Hopkins, a strong abolitionist, actually owned slaves. That's not unusual. In fact, depending on the region or the area, that you'll find out there's a lot of individuals. If you weren't aware, there are black individuals, free blacks, that owned slaves. Just like today, there are social justice warriors who own iPhones and Nike shoes. Both companies have been found to benefit from slave labor and create products that contain minerals or raw inputs that were produced by slaves. You, as a purchaser of that product, is enabling that organization to continue a practice that you don't believe in. So will you make the harsh decisions, or will you stand in judgment of others? Will you do within the scope of your relationships what is right, or stand there in demand of others to do what is right? I'm going to argue that it's counterproductive to stand there and ask other people to do what you have not done. And I would encourage you to be a producer who drives forward outcomes and does what is right in your own understanding. You will be judged for it, and you will also know sometimes hardships for it. But in the long run, you can sleep with the understanding and the confidence that you did what was right. And when you look upon others, seek out what they've done right, not look for little nitpicks to pull them apart and tear them down. We could go into this in a lot of detail, but the strategic relationship element is understanding the relationship between the context of the situation and the time period, and to judge based on that context rather than the modern context. And then when you make a decision, consider all three as input to a fact-based analysis, which produces a choice that you make on your own. Thanks for listening. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. You can ask questions at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. I'm really easy to find out there on the internet. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'd love to hear your comments. And if you haven't liked and subscribed, do so right now. Thanks for listening. I'm here to help high-income professionals transform business relationships into profits guaranteed.